You are kneeling in the sand. Your knees burn. The iron collar around your neck is so tight you can barely swallow. The chain connects you to 11 other women. You can hear them breathing, some crying, one praying in a language you do not know. A man's shadow blocks the sun. Relief from the heat for half a second. Then hands grab your jaw. They force your mouth open. Fingers press against your teeth, your gums, the back of your throat. You gag. He does not stop. He checks your tongue for sickness, looks at your eyes, pulls down your lip like you are a horse at an auction. Because that is exactly what you are now. 12 days ago, you were the daughter of a village chief in the Sahara. 12 days ago, you had a mother who called your name every morning. She is dead now. You watched it happen. And you kept walking because the men with swords made it clear. Stop moving. Join her. In Arabic, they have a word for what you have become. Jaria. It means slave girl. But that translation is too clean, too soft. It hides what the word really means. What it really means is your body is merchandise now. Your future is whatever a buyer decides to do with it. Your past no longer exists. The man examining you steps back. He nods to another man holding a leather pouch. Coins change hands. You have just been sold for the third time this month. And the place they are taking you, historians would spend centuries trying to pretend it never existed. This is the Arab slave trade. 14 million Africans. Over 1,300 years. A system so good at erasing human beings that almost no descendants survive to tell the story. If this history matters to you, drop a like and subscribe. Crown and Dagger does not hide from the stories the world tried to bury. You know about the Atlantic slave trade. Ships, chains, plantations in America. 12 million Africans transported across the ocean over 400 years. That history has museums, monuments, movies. Children learn about it in school. Politicians give speeches about it. But there was another slave trade. Older, longer, and by some counts, even larger. The Arab slave trade began in the 7th century, soon after the rise of Islam and the Arab conquests that spread across North Africa. It did not end until the 20th century. Saudi Arabia officially ended slavery in 1962. Mauritania in 1981. These are not dates from ancient history. These are dates your grandparents remember. There are people alive today who were born into societies where this trade still worked legally. Between the years 650 and 1900, somewhere between 14 and 17 million Africans were taken from their homes and brought to the Middle East, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. Some historians say the true number is even higher because records were bad and countless deaths were not written down. More people, over a longer time, through routes that stretched across 3 continents. Yet almost no one talks about it. Why? Because this slave trade was made to leave no trace. And it worked. In America today, there are 45 million people of African descent, living proof of what happened. Their existence keeps the memory alive. Their fight for equality makes sure the history is never forgotten. In the Middle East, after 1,300 years of bringing in millions of Africans, there is almost nothing. Small communities in Yemen, scattered people in southern Iraq, a few thousand Afro-Arabs in Morocco. Tiny pieces left where there should be millions. Where did 14 million people go? The answer is the darkest part of this story. The men were castrated. This is not a guess. This is written in hundreds of old records from many centuries. Arab slave traders regularly castrated African males, about 80 to 90% of them. The operation was done at specific places along the trade routes. Egyptian monasteries became famous for it. Coptic Christian monks created methods that made survival rates a little better. Only a little. For every man who lived through castration, somewhere between 3 and 5 died from blood loss, infection, or shock. Some records say even more died. Think about that math. If a trader needed 100 living eunuchs to sell at market, he might start with 400 or 500 men. The rest died screaming in the sand. The money reasons were cruel, but made sense. Castrated slaves could not have children. They could not make families. They could not create communities that might grow strong enough to fight back. They could not leave descendants who might one day ask for freedom. They worked, they got old, they died, and they were replaced with new captives from the next raid. Generation after generation for 1,300 years. But the women served a completely different purpose. They were kept whole, kept able to have children, kept specifically because of what their bodies could produce. And what happened to them is a story that old records tell only in careful, gentle language, in silences between words, in details that writers of the time thought were too rude to describe directly. The machine needed constant feeding. Arab merchants were not raiders themselves. They were businessmen running advanced trade networks that spread across continents. They did not attack villages themselves. Instead, they made money systems that encouraged Africans to capture and sell each other. Guns flowed into the continent. European firearms traded through Arab middlemen. Textiles, luxury goods, salt, which was very valuable in regions below the Sahara, and in exchange for these goods, human beings. The kingdom of Dahomey, in what is now Benin, became one of the major suppliers. The kingdom's economy grew to depend on yearly slave raids against neighboring peoples. The Sultanate of Zanzibar controlled the East African trade routes. The Funj Sultanate of Sudan dominated the Nile corridor. Various Tuareg groups controlled the trans-Saharan routes. African kingdoms fought wars with their neighbors, not for land, but for human merchandise. Captured survivors were marched to collection points and sold to Arab traders. The cycle fed itself forever. More guns meant more successful raids. More raids meant more captives. More captives meant more money to buy things. More money meant more guns. A machine that fed on human suffering and grew stronger with every life it ate. Villages were attacked at dawn when people could fight back the least. Warriors surrounded settlements while people slept. The attack was sudden and overwhelming. Men who fought were killed right away. Men who gave up were judged on the spot. Age, health, strength. Young, strong men were separated for castration and sale. Older men with no market value were often killed where they stood. But the women faced different judgments entirely. Traders looked them over with specific needs in mind. Age mattered a lot. Girls too young would need years of feeding before becoming useful. Women too old had less value. The best age was about 13 to 25 years old. Old enough to survive the brutal journey ahead. Young enough for decades of use. How they looked changed the price dramatically. Arab markets had specific likes that experienced traders knew well. Certain body types, certain features. Different markets preferred different things. Ethiopian women got the highest prices in almost all markets. Their features were seen as very desirable. They might sell for double or triple what women from other regions brought. Women who met the desired standards were separated immediately. They would get slightly better treatment during transport. Not from kindness. Never from kindness. Damaged goods sold for less. Protecting the investment made money sense. The breaking apart of families happened at capture sites or collection points. Mothers torn from children, husbands from wives, sisters from brothers. The bonds of a lifetime cut in moments with no hope of ever seeing each other again. European explorers and missionaries who saw these separations wrote about scenes of unbelievable sadness. The screaming, the desperate holding on as families tried to cling to each other for a few more seconds. The last moments of touch before chains were pulled tight, and people who had loved each other their entire lives were dragged in opposite directions. Never to meet again, never to know what happened to each other. One missionary wrote that the sounds haunted his dreams for years after, that he could still hear the mothers calling for their children decades later, that no matter how far he traveled or how much time passed, those screams followed him. Those screams echoed across Africa for 1,300 years. And almost no one in the outside world heard them. Then came the Sahara. The trans-Saharan routes were journeys measured not in miles, but in death. Picture the distance from New York to Denver. Now imagine walking it in chains with almost no water under a sun that kills. From collection points in sub-Saharan Africa to the great markets of North Africa, Tripoli, Tunis, Cairo, Marrakesh. Caravans traveled distances over 7,500 miles. Some routes stretched more than 2,000 miles. The journey took 2 to 3 months in the best conditions. Conditions were never the best. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth. Daytime temperatures often go over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The sand gets so hot it burns skin on touch. Shade does not exist for hundreds of miles. Then night falls and the temperature drops fast. The same desert that cooked you during the day can fall below freezing after dark. The temperature change alone killed countless people. Water was the most precious resource, and it was shared with cruel calculation. Camels needed water to live, to carry Camels goods. Were expensive. Slaves were cheaper than camels. Slaves could be replaced. So slaves got whatever water was left after the animals drank. Lips cracking until they bled. Tongue swelling. The maddening knowledge that there was nothing to drink and hundreds of miles of burning sand still ahead. Food was very little. Dried dates, sometimes meat, enough calories to keep legs moving. Never enough to stay healthy over months of walking. The death rates were terrible. Historians think that 20 to 30% of slaves died during Sahara crossings. Some caravans lost half their human cargo. There are stories of caravans arriving with more than 60% losses. Those who fell down were left where they fell. Stopping to bury bodies would slow the caravan. Stopping to help the dying might mean losing the living. The money reasons did not allow for kindness. People were abandoned alive, too weak to walk further, left sitting in the sand as the caravan moved on, waiting to die. So the routes became marked by bones. Heinrich Barth, a German explorer who crossed the Sahara in the 1850s, wrote what he saw. The road was literally strewn with human skeletons. In some valleys, the bones were so many that one could hardly avoid stepping on them. Skulls bleached white by the sun, rib cages half buried in drifting sand. These were not ancient remains. They were new, fresh additions to trails that had been collecting bodies for over 1,000 years. René Cayley wrote of similar horrors on Western routes. He described valleys that looked white from a distance, not from sand, but from piled bones. Gustav Nachtigall wrote of passing through areas where skulls and bones made the sand feel almost like pavement underfoot. Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps millions over 13 centuries. Their remains scattered across the world's largest desert, marking the paths that swallowed them. Silent proof of a trade the world chose to ignore. For the women who survived, who somehow lived through the heat and cold and thirst and starvation, arriving at a North African port meant only that the immediate dying had stopped. But survival came at a cost. Many arrived broken in ways you could not see on the surface. Their bodies had made the journey. Their spirits had not. Their ordeal was not over. It was changing into something else. The slave markets of the Arab world were ancient places, improved over centuries into operations of frightening efficiency. Cairo's market had worked continuously for over 1,000 years by the time European observers began writing about it. Generation after generation of traders had perfected the practices, the pricing, the ways of judging. Buyers came from across the Islamic world and beyond. Ottoman nobles from Constantinople, Persian merchants from Isfahan, wealthy Arabs from Damascus and Baghdad, traders from the Gulf states looking for household servants, even European buyers, despite official bans, found ways to take part. The markets were sorted by type. Common laborers in one section, skilled workers in another, household servants in a third, and behind screens in the most private areas, the women meant for private sale. The examination was systematic and thorough. Teeth first. Dental health showed age and condition. Experienced buyers could guess how many useful years were left from teeth alone. Then skin checked for disease, scars, marks. Hair checked for texture and length. Then the rest. Buyers paying top prices demanded complete evaluation. The exams were personal, invasive, done with the lack of feeling a butcher might show when judging animals. European travelers wrote accounts so graphic their publishers often cut parts out. One British observer in the 1830s wrote, "The women are made to walk, to turn, to display themselves in ways that cannot be described in polite company. The buyers examine them as a horseman examines a mare, with identical cold calculation and complete absence of human feeling. Prices changed based on origin, looks, and planned use. Common women sold for modest amounts. Women with desirable features brought much more. Young virgins from preferred backgrounds could sell for the equal of several years' wages. The highest prices were paid privately by agents working for the richest families. Zanzibar became the largest slave market in the Indian Ocean world. At its peak, 50,000 slaves passed through each year. The island's whole economy turned around human merchandise. David Livingstone saw the trade himself. His writings helped push British efforts to end it. What he saw changed him forever. He wrote, "To overstate its evils is simply impossible. The subject does not admit of exaggeration. The sights I have seen are so revolting that I always strive to drive them from memory. The market worked openly until 1873, when British pressure finally forced it to close. The Sultan signed a treaty. The auctions officially ended, but the trade went on in secret for decades after. Ships sailed at night. Sales happened in hidden places. The demand was too strong. The profits too large. Where there is demand, supply finds a way. Where did these women go after they were sold? The answer depended completely on who bought them and what they were bought for. The richest buyers were building harems. Ottoman sultans kept harems with hundreds of women, sometimes thousands. The imperial harem at Topkapi Palace in Constantinople held up to 2,000 women at different times in history. Lesser nobles and local governors kept smaller collections matching their wealth. Even fairly rich merchants might own several women for home and personal use. The harem was more complicated than the word suggests today. It was not only about physical pleasure. It was a political place where women competed for favor. Having a son for a powerful man could mean everything. The mother of a future sultan had great power. So women plotted, formed alliances, undermined rivals. Poison was common. Political moves as clever as anything in the formal court happened behind harem walls. For a captured African woman, entering a harem meant the systematic erasing of everything she had been. She got a new name. Her language was forbidden. Her religion was changed. Her past was destroyed and rebuilt. Teachers taught her new customs, behaviors, expectations, how to walk, how to serve, what was allowed and what was punished. In the end, nothing remained of who she had been. The person her family loved was gone, replaced by someone created to serve her owners. Some women managed this successfully. A very few gained real power. Kozum Sultan controlled Ottoman politics for decades. She began life as a slave girl taken from a small Greek village. Hurrem Sultan became the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, an almost unheard of thing for a former slave. But these were exceptions so rare that history books write their names precisely because they were unusual. For every Kozum, thousands lived and died unknown, used until no longer useful, then thrown away. Women sold to less wealthy buyers faced different situations. Many became household servants with extra duties. They cooked, cleaned, raised children, and gave in whenever their owner wanted. There was no idea of consent, no choice to refuse. Islamic law technically gave some protections to slave women who became mothers. A slave who had her master's child was called a muwallad, mother of a child. She could not be sold after that. Her child was born legally free. When her master died, she would gain her freedom. But these protections had to be enforced. Reality was uneven, and protections only applied after pregnancy. Before that, she was property. Children born from these unions were legally free, often recognized. Some became important. Multiple sultans were sons of slave mothers. But the mothers remained slaves unless specifically freed. Whatever closeness occurred was forced, not chosen. Over generations, these children married into Arab populations. Their features mixed, their African heritage watered down with each new generation until it became invisible, until it vanished completely. This was the final erasure, not just of individuals, but of their descendants. Not just of lives, but of any proof those lives had ever existed. If you are still here, hit subscribe. This story is not over. The Arab slave trade did not end with a dramatic abolition. There was no Emancipation Proclamation, no civil war fought over it, no moment when the world rose up and declared it finished. Instead, it faded slowly, unwillingly, under outside pressure rather than inside moral awakening. British naval power gradually closed East African routes in the late 1800s. The Royal Navy actively hunted slave ships. Colonial governments suppressed trans-Saharan trade as European powers divided Africa. International pressure forced official abolitions throughout the 20th century. But the legacy is not monuments or memorials. The legacy is absence. In the Middle East today, there are almost no descendants of the 14 million taken there. The men were castrated. The women's children were absorbed into Arab populations. Their heritage diluted until it disappeared. The victims vanished so completely that most people do not know they existed. No movies have been made about them. No holidays remember their suffering. No politicians give speeches in their memory. In 2020, Archaeologists in Libya found a mass grave, hundreds of remains. Studies showed they were sub-Saharan Africans who died in the 18th or 19th century, almost certainly slaves who never finished the crossing, who fell and were left behind while the caravan moved on. They had no names in any record, no descendants to claim them, no one anywhere in the world who remembered they had ever lived. No grave markers, no memorials, no one to mourn them, just bones in the desert. Silent evidence of a tragedy the world chose to forget. The Atlantic slave trade left 45 million descendants who make sure history is never forgotten. The Arab slave trade left silence. Nothing but silence. 14 million people erased so completely that we do not have their names. The woman in the market, the one whose teeth were checked, whose body was judged, whose humanity was taken away one inspection at a time. We will never know what she was called before they took her name, the name her mother gave her, the name her village knew her by. She might have ended up in a Cairo harem, competing with dozens of other women for scraps of attention from a man who owned her. She might have ended up in a Baghdad household, cooking and cleaning and giving in whenever called. She might have ended up in a palace in Istanbul, forgotten in a corner when her youth faded. She might have had children who never learned her original language, who never heard her songs, who never knew her stories or where she came from. She might have died in the desert, her bones joining millions of others, marking the routes that civilization has tried to forget. What we know is that she existed. She suffered. She endured things that no human being should ever endure. And for 1,300 years, millions like her fed a machine designed to consume them completely. The Atlantic slave trade has monuments, museums, memorials, days of remembrance. This history has sand covering bones that no one will ever identify. Remember her not as a number, not as a statistic. Remember her as someone's daughter, someone who laughed once, someone who had a name before they erased it. That's the only memorial these 14 million will ever receive. This is Epic Horror Earth. We do not clean up history. We show you what really happened. If this story mattered to you, drop a like. Hit subscribe if you have not already, and tell me in the comments what other buried history should we uncover.